Welcome to COVID-19, e-commerce and the rise of new retail in China. I'm Michael Lawrence, I'm Chief Executive of Asia House, and Asia House is producing this event in partnership with TechNode. On behalf of TechNode and the entire Asia House team, a very warm welcome to you all. We have a truly global audience today with registrations from Asia, Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and the US. Thanks to all of you for taking part. The COVID-19 pandemic has triggered a dramatic and rapid change in consumer behavior and business models, with e-commerce and online retail expanding at a truly breathtaking rate. This is a global phenomenon. Sales numbers for many leading online retailers have risen sharply during lockdown, but perhaps this accelerated period of innovation has been most notable in China. Even before the lockdowns, China's e-commerce landscape was undergoing change, with social buying and live commerce becoming increasingly common. Similar innovation has been slow to take hold in other lockdown countries. During today's event, we're going to explore the new trends in China and examine whether they will be adopted elsewhere. Further, we'll look at whether the leap in online retail will continue post-lockdown, and the role e-commerce and the digital economy will play as the world emerges from the most dramatic economic slowdown since the Great Depression. We're very fortunate today to be joined by four fantastic speakers: Zhongmin Xiong, Partner, McKinsey Global Institute; Andre Zhu, who's Senior Vice President and Strategy and Legal at Pinduoduo; Pocket Sun, Co-Founder and Managing Partner, Sogal Ventures; and Dr. Gang Lu, founder and CEO of TechNode, our partners for today's event. Many thanks to all of you for joining us today. I'll shortly invite our guests to make some opening remarks. They'll speak for 4 or 5 minutes, and then I'll chair a discussion with them. Very keen to have you, the audience, participate in the dialogue. If you wish to ask a question, please let me know by the Q&A function on Zoom. Just to be clear, this discussion is on the record. We will be recording the event and we'll be making it available a bit later. So to get us underway, I'd like to invite Zhongmin Xiong to share with us his thoughts and insights on how the pandemic has accelerated digitalization and what it means for the world. Zhongmin.
Thanks a lot, Michael, for the opportunity. So I personally went through a 14-day quarantine process at a government-nominated local hotel in Shanghai, 200 RMB per day, 50 RMB for 3 meals. So I'm happy to share my frontline observation out of Shanghai. So let me start with a broad observation on what is happening in China and about the next normal. So there's a lot of debate on the next normal and new normal. What will it be, etc. Right? But then one group of people believe that hey, the post-COVID world will be completely different. Right? And another group of people believe that, as long as we have, good vaccine, it'll go back to the old normal. Our view is that, what COVID is doing is an acceleration or amplification of many pre-existing trends. And let me highlight 3 of them based upon the observation in China. First is digitization of the economy, right? So, we have seen and heard a lot of interesting and inspiring success stories about, O2O, live streaming, social buying, et cetera, out of China, which is not surprising at all, right? Because, as Michael, you mentioned, China has been a global leader in terms of consumer-facing digital economy. The share of e-commerce out of total retail is about 25%. Mobile payment penetration is about 80%, which is generally 2 to 3 times higher than that of the other many advanced economies. So it's very natural to see that kind of innovation coming out of China. What is surprising to me was the digitization of less digitized part of the economy, because they have to, right? So for example, take healthcare as an example. Telemedicine, online consultation surged, right? Because patients didn't want to go to the hospital. Hospitals didn't have capacity to accommodate patients. And government announced bold reimbursement scheme, right? That is including the online treatment, right? So, the telemedicine and online consultation is likely to be a part of the new normal. And in fact, there was a 35 times surge of registered doctors in a free online consultation platform. take real estate as an example. Customers cannot visit property sites for renting or purchasing. So, there was a virtual reality platform which also experienced about 35 times surge in terms of the users, right? And by the way, which is a great news for the property developers, because they don't need to go through the middleman. They can now directly own the relationship with the end customer. Right? So take business processes as well, right? Now building a resilient supply chain matters. So there's a great push to build digital supply chain and industrial IoT and so on. So and take consumer segment as an example. Old people in low-tier rural cities. Now they are the mobile banking users, right? So what COVID is doing is an acceleration of digitization even in this less digitized part of the economy, right? So that is the first observation. Second observation is the rising competitive intensity. There is a so-called superstar effect, right? So if you look at the entertainment industry, right, or sports industry, a small share of celebrities, they earn a much larger share of income, which is so-called superstar effect. That has been the case in the corporate landscape as well. Top 10% of the companies, they tend to make 70 to 80% of the economic profit of the larger firms, and that situation was even more prominent in China. That number was as high as 90%. And because of COVID, the situation is getting more pronounced, right? So the companies with a very strong technology background, an agile organization, and speedy decision-making system, they are gaining their share and growing much faster, right? And which is happening both for local companies as well as multinational companies. And it is not unusual to see 200%, 300% growth of a certain tech-savvy companies in China. And same thing for many multinational companies, right? So leading sportswear brand or premium fashion retail or cosmetics brand, they also experience a rapid recovery out of the COVID during the COVID outbreak and also post-COVID process, because they already have built a very strong customer engagement channel, including retail account and O2O e-commerce channel and so on. Right? So and our view is that there's likely to be even more reshuffling or the competition across the competitive landscape. And one data point is our survey. According to our customer survey, more than a quarter of consumers say that they are likely to they already switched their primary store for purchasing during the COVID, and then half of them say they are likely to stick to that new channel, right? So there will be greater competition out of this. The third observation is the importance of digital transformation. It matters before COVID situation, and it is becoming even more important. And growth in online does not always mean a growth in profit, because if not managed well, there is a huge cost associated with it in terms of inventory write-off and stock out, and then also unhappy customers. Therefore, digital transformation needs to be managed well, right? So, and digital transformation is not just about bringing your products online, right? So then it needs to be managed by transforming the fundamental businesses across the processes, across technology and people. And in that sense, China is a good place to experiment and scale up the innovation, because China already has a very well developed digital ecosystem, good infrastructure and digital savvy consumers, right? So as a global company, China can the China experience can be a helpful reference point and also a playbook, right, for the global businesses, and that's the role that China can play. So in sum, the COVID was more of an accelerator or the amplifier of the pre-existing trends, and I talked about the digitization of the economy and rising competitive intensity, and also the importance of data transformation.
Jeremy, thanks very much. Andres, I'd like to go to you now. PDD, some phenomenal growth numbers over the last quarter. You're one of the companies that have benefited from the change in consumer behavior. So tell us a little more.
Well, hi, thank you, Michael. Thank you for having me here today. Pinduoduo has become a household name in China in the recent years. But if you actually live in Europe or elsewhere, you may not be very familiar with our platform yet. So maybe I'll give a brief introduction of Pinduoduo first. So Pinduoduo, or PDD, was founded in late 2015. In less than 5 years, the platform has grown from zero to servicing 628 million users across China. Our GMV last year surpassed 1 trillion RMB, and we're one of the world's fastest growing technology companies. We're also the largest social commerce platform in the world. You know, in 2015, when we launched our platform, we pioneered this social commerce concept. And then now the whole e-commerce industry is buzzing about this social commerce. So what is it like shopping on a social commerce platform like PDD? You can think of going to a shopping mall or a weekend farmer's market with your friends. You're not quite sure what you will find, but you know it's going to be something interesting, right? And you may not end up buying anything yet, but it doesn't really matter because you're just having a good time browsing products, chatting with friends, and probably haggling prices with vendors. And because you're having so much fun, you probably want to come back and probably want to bring more friends with you. Our goal is to move that kind of like shopping experience from offline to online and bring more fun interaction from this shopping mall experience and farmer's market into this digital marketplace. And we like to call this business model this Disney plus Costco, which represents a combination of world-class entertainment and great savings at the same time. So it's quite different from the traditional search-based e-commerce model, which is a solitary bilateral experience between one customer and one merchant. You know, we're certainly seeing this trend of e-commerce going in that direction of more fun, more social, more interactive. You know, because recently, you look at Facebook. Facebook recently announced that they're launching an e-commerce service that integrates a lot of the social features as well. And today we're talking about the e-commerce and COVID-19, right? And then the pandemic. I mean, we clearly have seen this pandemic affecting the lives of everyone, including particularly the retail business. And then because the virus feeds on physical interactions, offline retail has been hit particularly hard. You know, if you look at the statistics, in the first quarter of this year, right, the pandemic hit the China the hardest time. And the offline retail sales dropped 21% year on year. The overall retail sales of goods dropped 16% year on year. But if you look at online retail sales of goods, it's actually increased 6%. What these numbers show us is that more people are now relying on e-commerce platforms to supply their shopping necessities. So for an e-commerce platform like ourselves, we really have to step up and service well our 600 million plus users, because they're now depending on our platform to get their essential supplies like medical devices, food, groceries, especially when the offline retail is pretty much shut down during this whole pandemic. Now, of course, the pandemic has caused a lot of pain and sufferings. Hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives, millions lost their jobs. But now it's with all these countries and business gradually coming back online. I do think this is the time for us in the retail sector to reflect where we can do better. So I do want to thank Asia House for organizing this discussion. It's a very timely topic. Thank you.
Andre, thanks very much. Pocket-san, really very keen to get your views on how China's leapfrogged on e-commerce, and also, you know, is this unique to China? Is this something that can travel?
Hi, very nice to be sharing here. So my background is in venture capital, and I'm also an entrepreneur myself. So as a fund, we focus on how the next generation lives, works, and stays healthy. So naturally, e-commerce and new retail are very interesting to us. We actually focus on investing in the US and Asia. So constantly we are transferring knowledge between these different markets that we look at. So what's interesting to me for China's e-commerce is that, first of all, it is 3 times the size of US e-commerce, and US e-commerce is the second largest in size. So there is a huge difference in just the scale of the market. And recently, Chinese e-commerce has also had penetration way beyond tier 1 and 2 cities, thanks to companies like Pinduoduo that is, really bringing the e-commerce services to beyond the mega cities. So actually tier 2 and tier 6 cities are showing the strongest growth in the last year. For those who are not familiar, I want to just briefly remind you like why China was able to leapfrog on e-commerce and new retail and become the largest in the world. So first of all, I think the Chinese consumers went through a lot of skipping. First, we skipped desktops. Most Chinese e-commerce has no websites, very, very, very different from US e-commerce or anywhere else. So people go directly to mobile. So pretty much like as Jungmin talked about, like 80% of mobile purchases are like dominant in Chinese e-commerce. And the second thing is we skipped credit cards. So there was no previous baggage on the miles and points. And people just went directly to mobile payments. And actually more than 80% of smartphone users in China use mobile payments compared to only 27% of them in the US do. And the third thing is China has very well established logistics, which are both cost efficient and very fast in delivery. And number 4 is we have built world-class manufacturing, which enables e-commerce brands to really build scalable businesses very quickly. So I believe that the e-commerce scale and universality are very unique to China. And what I've noticed recently is that led by Tmall, there is so much campaigns and consumption triggering activities, such as the upcoming June 18th, which is a similar shopping festival to Singles Day, which has become a huge phenomenon beyond China. So there's constantly these provoking promotions to try to get you to buy something, and it's always a good time to shop. And number 3, I think when it comes to new retail, I'd say new retail is no retail or shared retail. No retail because offline retail, especially during and after the pandemic, has become more difficult to make money on. And it has become purely a brand engagement tool and positioning tool. And especially for new brands, it's a way for them to establish the vibes and the lifestyles around a brand instead of trying to create sales per acre. And retail has also become an entertainment attraction. So things like Museum of Ice Cream that started in the US became really popular, and show fields in New York, for example. These are examples of how retail locations have become more like a millennial Disney and beyond just retail functions. So I think Andre also talked about live streaming and how it's been effectively increasing the engagement of consumers. And for retail, it's the same, like very little foot traffic happens during the weekdays. So how do you make the empty space work for you? Live stream might become the next step for these retail spaces to really utilize the space, the shelves, the merchandise, and turn them into a digital mall when there isn't people visiting. And Starbucks, for example, they are also sharing the space. Like on the day, during the day, they sell coffee, and at night they started to sell alcohol. So just to maximize the efficiency of the space. And shared retail, what I mean by that is what's difficult for consumer brands these days is the higher and higher customer acquisition cost. And that is the same problem in China and elsewhere. In the US, there's Amazon, there's Facebook and Google, and you kind of pay 30% of your revenue to advertising and to be listed on these platforms. And in China, it's the same thing. So with shared retail, whether it's online or offline, people are trying to find and group with like-minded brands so that they can have sustainable customer acquisition channels and lower the cost together. I will stop here for now.
Thank you very much, Professor Sun. Let me go now to Gang Lu. Sounds from what everyone said, there's still huge further potential for e-commerce in China. Is that your take?
Well, I want to say, thank you, because it's our great pleasure to work with Asia House and to make it happen. Because we, TechNode, and also myself, I've been engaged with the local ecosystem for quite a few years. So back to the question is, I think when we talk about e-commerce, and also when we talk about e-commerce during the pandemic, I think we've been kind of asked by many times by our readers. Maybe the first question is always they say, because during the pandemic, they asked me, can you share us some new kind of innovation from China during the pandemic? And because all the speakers they mentioned live streaming and new retail, but I have to say, so actually that's kind of a wrong question. Why? Because actually I didn't see anything new, really new, kind of invented during the pandemic. I think as Andre, also our first speaker shared, actually everything here happened here is already in China in the past 1-2 years. So it's really nothing new, but pandemic is really just, push everything much, faster development than, ever than before. And the second question for the e-commerce, I think if you asked me maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I think before Pinduoduo exactly, before Pinduoduo kind of starting, conquering the China market, I think that the lots of kind of voice, and they really think e-commerce in China is done because, Alibaba, because of JD, but suddenly Pinduoduo, come to everybody's attention. And we also some small one, they're doing cross-border e-commerce. So back to your answer, I think still e-commerce, even in China, we see the big guys, the big players here, still the lots of potentials. And also, we are always asked by the readers, they're asking something like, okay, so can we, the China obviously has good success in the e-commerce market. So the people say, oh, can we kind of copy the model and, from China to other, to the global market in Southeast Asia or in Europe or States? I think to me, and so maybe the speaker, other speaker can share more. And to me, it's really hard. I think that Andrew also mentioned, I think in China, e-commerce is not really just, selling or buying platform. I think in China, e-commerce is a very mature system because it's something to do, the way you play, the platform is for example, used to be we just pay, but it's something to do with infrastructure. We have 5G, we have QR code, all the Alipay, we have all infrastructure ready. And also, for Pinduoduo, is probably to me is the word gamifications in commerce, because the way how people play with Pinduoduo is nothing like the Taobao or Alibaba or Jingdong. It's really quite fun when you on Pinduoduo itself, and also to do with smart logistic, smart supply chain. I think because we have infrastructure, everything ready, so that's why e-commerce is so successful in China. And also, to me, I'm really looking for, after pandemic, because we talk about new normal, for example, live streaming is super hot in China right now. And plus, because, you see the KOL, the big guys, they started selling stuff, before the camera.
We seem to have lost Ganglu there. He's frozen. We will come back to him in a moment. But look, thank you very much, all of you. Lots raised in that discussion, and very happy now to invite the audience to start thinking about whether they want to participate. If you do, please just let me know via the Q&A function. Just put your hand in there and I'll bring you in at some point. But if you don't mind, I'd like to go around some questions. lots of themes there. Obviously, China being well advanced of most of the world in terms of e-commerce and new retail. Does it scale to Asia? Does it scale to the US? Pocket Sun was talking about how China leapfrog, no desktops, straight to mobile, mobile payment. We talked about the infrastructure of 5G. China is clearly well advanced in sort of in e-retail and e-commerce and online retail. But Jongmin Song, do you see these trends being adopted and embraced in the post-pandemic world by the rest of Asia and then Western economies?
Yeah, so I think the strong push toward digitization, that is very relevant, not only to China, but also around the world, right? And then Pocket mentioned a few things that the reason why, we see leapfrogging in China. You see also similar, the situation in Asia too. And then also part of it is driven by pain points, right? So, when you have, underdeveloped offline the retail industry, then but then you want to buy something, then if you go online, then you are able to buy them. Then, there is also, greater potential for e-commerce to pick up, right? And then also these days, the ideas are flowing, capital is flowing, right? Business models are flowing, right, across the region. So therefore, a lot of inspiration and entrepreneurs and business models, that can also happen in the rest of the Asia and also the world, where they share similar pain points and similar characteristics, right? But then whether they'll be able to, match the performance or the speed of the development in China, that is still a question mark, right? Because, China has built a, very good infrastructure in terms of logistics and road and highways and, transportation and so on. And, that infrastructure cannot be built overnight. And then also the manufacturing ecosystem that China has built, right? So also one of the tipping point of China's e-commerce booming was back in 2008, when these exporters, they couldn't export anymore. So they turned to the domestic market. So there was a, good supply of, lots of, the various products into the Chinese market. If you don't have the supplier base and manufacturing system in your local market, probably it'll be difficult to replicate.
Pocket Sun, I want to come to you with the same question. You talk with great passion and insight on the China market. You look as an investor at China and the US. What about Southeast Asia? We talk to governments in Southeast Asia all the time, and they talk about their push for a digital economy and e-commerce, and that's part of their growth plans preceding the lockdowns, preceding the pandemic. Do you see opportunities there? Do you see some of these trends traveling to the rest of Asia?
The short answer is yes. I've been living here in Singapore for the past 4.5 years, but I have to say the e-commerce development here is not at all at the level of China. And here there is no clear winner yet. Alibaba has obtained a controlling share in Lazada, which is a big e-commerce platform here. And I think with the pandemic, it definitely pushed more businesses to be digitized, which was not part of their plan. And I think a lot of people are still reluctantly adjusting to the new reality. And I think people here are, as consumers, they are, I think, much slower to adapt to changes. So even, something like QR code, I guess the pandemic has really accelerated the use of QR codes, which wasn't so popular in the past. And I think companies like Grab, which is like Uber elsewhere, or Didi in China, Grab has really grabbed a huge market share on like food delivery and all things logistics related, including delivery and groceries, etc. during this time. So it's really interesting to see, I guess, a transportation player to play up such a important role. But I think Grab, for example, did a lot of preparation before the pandemic. They have Grab Pay. They have set up all these different hotel deals on the ride sharing app. So I think they're winning because they did the work beforehand. But overall, I think the e-commerce overall level here is still, I guess, maybe China 5-ish years ago.
Right, right. Andre, I want to talk to you because you've also had enormous success in China. Does the PDD business model and way of approaching online retail, does that transfer? Can you take that to Southeast Asia? Can you take that to Western economies?
I think the answer is yes, because if you think about this social, I mean, people's need for human interaction and the sense of connection and belonging online, I mean, it's like that kind of that is a universal need, right? So with the social distancing orders keeping people away from each other in the physical world, they actually come online to find that communities. Then shopping, I think, is one of the scenarios where people can actually find their communities. We think that's going to be one of the new normals that people is looking for because of the pandemic. It's actually consistent with our goal, which is to bring fun, bring your interaction, and bring the social elements from shopping malls into the digital marketplace. And then I think the core of our digital experience that user can, is like just introduce a little bit about the PDD business model. It's like the users can interact with each other and then buy products in groups, and that hence the introducing the social elements. You actually get a lower price if you buy as a team. So the team purchase model helps both buyers and sellers. Then the buyers get better values and sellers get increased demand for the products. This community experience is what social commerce is all about. I think that's a universal value.
Great, thank you very much. Gang, before I go to questions from the audience, quick one to you. Do you see these trends accelerating in the rest of Asia outside of China?
Yeah, I would say maybe partially applied to the rest of Asia. We need maybe 3-4 years. And
sorry, we're having a bit of a problem hearing you. It's the new world, the new order of doing everything digitally. Sometimes things go slightly wrong. We'll come back to you on that, but I do want to now bring in some of the audience because inundated with questions, you might imagine, having such talented people on the panel. Some have written questions and I'll go to them, but Catherine Drew from CGTN has asked to ask some questions. So I'll go over to you. We won't be able to see her, but we'll be able to hear her. So I'm going to allow you, Catherine, now to talk and ask some questions. Over to you. Nope, that didn't work.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Thank you so much for taking my question. So I'm sitting in the CGTN Europe headquarters in Europe, in Chiswick in West London, and there's a lot of shopping all over, but it is a beautiful day as well. A lot of shopping malls near here, some really large ones. And you may have seen on the news yesterday, people were queuing to get back into these malls yesterday. There was even a scuffle outside a few of the shops. And it's really interesting to me about the trends that we're seeing in China. And I'm just wondering, obviously people during lockdown had missed the bricks and mortar shops. They were scuffling, queuing to get in. And I'm wondering if you just think perhaps in Europe we have a different mindset and we're just not ready quite yet for the trends that you're talking about in China. And I have a second question, which is, we hear a lot, particularly in the UK, about the death of the high street. And many people speak, very sadly that they find that the shops are closing, that high streets are no longer what they were. And I'm wondering if you think the death of the high street is just inevitable as we learn more about e-commerce.
Catherine, thanks very much. Let me start with Zhongmin. We'll ask you, and then we'll go to Pocket Sun.
Yeah, so I'm less familiar with the consumers in Europe, right? But then I think so. The first question is about the mindset difference in Europe. But then if you look at the consumers in China, they are also queuing outside of the luxury stores as well, right? So in Shanghai, whenever I go to this big shopping mall, they also are queuing, right? So I think Andre talked about the fundamental characteristics of people, so. People want to, go out and then enjoy the shopping experience and also the interaction with the human, right? And then also get advice, right? So I think, that element is not going anywhere. And then also related to the second question, depth of the high street or the offline shopping experience. I think consumers will not differentiate whether they are online customers or offline customers. They are just customers, right? So and then throughout their customer journey, sometimes online touch point matters, sometimes offline touch point matters, but then it needs to be integrated, right? And then that is the concept of so-called new retail or O2O. You may visit offline stores, but then you may also use mobile phone to check more information about the products and the comments from other the users on the social platform and so on. So going forward, there'll be greater integration of this online and offline experiences. But that doesn't mean that it's the death of high street or the offline store the channels, because customers will need both, right? So that's why Amazon is acquiring also Whole Foods, which is a offline channel, and then also they are setting up their offline bookstores as well, and same thing for Alibaba, right? So we'll see greater integration between on and offline going forward.
Pocket-san, you referred to this to some degree in your opening remarks. You talked about no retail or shared retail, and retailers using their space, I guess, for events, for entertainment. Is that a trend you see accelerating?
I think so. I think customers in China do expect more because they have been spoiled with good options and interesting options. So when they go to a retail store, a retail space in Shanghai, for example, they're not only there to shop, but they're looking for a retail experience, a dining experience, trying some new really hot on internet kind of products. They want to take photos for their Instagram and Red, which is a photo sharing app in China. They're there to meet people. They're there to be entertained. They're there to enjoy some art. Like, it's all mixed up. And if you don't deliver this multifunctional experience, then people might, go somewhere else. And I don't know if that's the reality yet in Europe, and maybe people don't expect that much. But in China, I think brands are constantly pushed to create more interesting, appealing, new attractions for people to come. And the death of high street, I think one issue with that is sustainability. I think that Gen Z generation in China, we call them post 95, meaning they were born after 1995. So these young people, one of their defining characters is that they really care about the environment. So I think high street has been, associating with a lot of the sustainability issues and manufacturing in third world countries. And so I think the younger consumers are going to want to do more with less and be conscious about the environmental impact. With high street brands, that's really hard to do. And I recently saw that Zara just closed 1,200 stores. And I think that's a huge hit for any brand to take. And I think high street brands could either, one, consider using the space in a different way, like how to develop it into a multifunctional place so that, you not only serve your products to the customers, but you can also showcase something else that shows your values, shows your mission, proves that you're, worthy of their love. And I think that is the next level question for any brand to think about.
At the very least, you're talking about possibly a decline in the high street, but a transformation of the high street, and quite a dramatic one. Andre, to you, this obviously plays very much to PDD, because in some senses you're trying to take that experience and make it digital.
Well, yes, Michael, I think I fully agree with the panelists on the integration of offline retail and online retail. And I think it's like live streaming, as people have mentioned live streaming. I think live streaming is really a good tool to actually make that integration perfectly. So we have been offering some unique experience to our users. For example, we work with shopping malls to create live virtual shopping tours, and then people can buy online all kinds of products sold in those shopping malls. And then we actually extended, we took our users on virtual museum tours. and then they can buy online souvenirs, from the museum gift shops. And then we have like former NBA All-Star Stephon Marbury live streaming on our platform, giving out tips to our users, and then you can buy online basketballs and jerseys. So we've been doing a lot of the experiments on, how to integrate offline retail and our offline retail into online and bring a lot of vendors traditionally selling stuff offline to the digital marketplace.
Okay, thanks. Next question from Chris Dixon. How is the progress of the digital Silk Road leading to the spread of Chinese e-commerce? And Gang Lu, I'll come to you. Digital Silk Road and the commitment of the government in China to expand digital is well versed, but is that helping to accelerate the adoption and expansion of e-commerce in China?
Yeah, can you just repeat that question?
Yeah, the question is, how is the progress of the digital Silk Road leading to the spread of Chinese e-commerce? So bringing e-commerce back to the Belt and Road vision, in particular, the digital component of that vision.
Well, it's quite a broad question. So maybe I just, from probably more consumers. I think the question, answer probably, I think yes. I think for Chinese societies or for Chinese consumers, because we don't really see as the previous the speakers, so we don't see that big gap between online and basically digital part and also offline part, because we talk about we talk about retail, we talk about the commerce, we always kind of combine everything together. So I think my answer, quick answer is yes. So I don't know if maybe other speaker can share more on that, because I don't see because always I mean, if you talk about offline experience, we always think, okay, if you do offline, we need something from online, and if you do online, we are expecting something from offline as well. So I think differently, from government, from the normal consumer, it's of course it's yes.
Okay, but John, can I come to you? I think most of the speakers have referred to infrastructure, and there's physical infrastructure, being able to move goods around, and China has obviously invested hugely in that, but there's also the digital infrastructure of China, which the vision of Belt and Road is to take that beyond the borders of China and bring it to Asia. Is that going to play a role in the expansion of e-commerce?
So my observation on the globalization in the context of digital economy is a lot more driven by private sector, right? So Alibaba and Tencent and JD.com, right? They are investing heavily, especially in Southeast Asia and also a bit in India as well, right? So therefore, yes, on the one hand, there is this Belt and Road Initiative and so-called this digital Silk Road, but then from what I see, right, in the business landscape, it is a lot more driven by private sector, and then also too, many technology players in China, for them, the globalization is usually meaning going Asia, right? So because there is a regional proximity, there is a lot of regional link. So about 60 to 70% of the flows in terms of trade, capital, and people are happening within Asia, and then Asia is a big growth engine of the world. So they tend to focus more on Asia, and it's and Alibaba is building digital free trade zone in Malaysia, for example, and also Chinese tech players are using Singapore as a regional hub for investment and so on. So you'll see more and more of those efforts driven by private sector.
Okay. Next question is, will the mom and pop retails go obsolete in the future if they're not integrated into the e-commerce market? Andre, I think I'll take that one to you because of the dramatic expansion of PDD. What happens to the small retailers?
Well, I think for our platform, we have been trying to integrate a lot of the, for example, I said this about live streaming, right? And then we actually use live streaming as a tool to encourage our merchants, especially small and medium-sized enterprises and merchants, to reach a larger audience, right? I mean, we have over 628 million users, and then so when we're using when we're looking at this live streaming experience for some of the merchants, that with with farmers from remote, poverty-driven, stricken areas of China, is not really the brand ambassadors or influencers I'm talking about. It's actually these mom and pop shops. Is these farmers and mom and pop shops, they're facing the camera and then telling our users in the really plain language that what they've been growing, what they've been selling, what kind of stuff they're selling, how big, how small, the text, texture. And so we do a lot of things to encourage these SMEs to digitalize. But I do believe that digitalization and becoming part of the digital economy is the way out, is the way to survive in the future.
Okay, thanks. A question from someone that I'll answer. I missed the beginning due to an overrun meeting. Will this be available online? Because it's very interesting. Yes, it will be. Question now from Jay Kasaria, who's in Dubai. In Dubai, shopping malls, tourist destinations, they're entertainment spaces, and they were the first things to reopen as self-isolation measures were relaxed. Do you foresee resistance to things like live streaming and online social experiences in places like Dubai? Pocket Sun, I'll come to you with that. Dubai is a particular shopping-based area. Will that be slow to adopt some of these new trends?
These two are not inherently contradictory to one another. From what I understand, the Middle East is filled with millennial youth generation, and this part of the population is not really satisfied when it comes to entertainment. And that's why, for example, audio content like podcasts are growing really fast right now in the region. And I'm sure live streaming has this entertainment feature, and as it develops in China, people are watching it like a reality show. People are expecting more from their live streamers, and they expect to learn from the live streamers and not just here to hear the pitches and make a purchase decision. So it becomes more of an overall thing. Even if you're not there to buy, you can still tune in for the giveaways, for just the fun of it, for the sense of I'm part of something, I'm a part of this ongoing activity that is really lively and happening. And I think that actually eases people's loneliness in a sense, especially during the pandemic. So I don't think offline shopping and live streaming are contradictory to each other. I think they can grow hand in hand. And I also think right now in China, 90% of live streaming is happening for shops, for brands themselves, and not just for the top KOL or influencer live streamers. So this means, many brands could be empowered digitally to create their own content beyond an offline store and an online website presence. They can add live streaming as a way for people to have better decision making, to get to know the brand stories, and to have a more realistic feel of what the products smell like, feel like, taste like. So I think that should be a welcome addition to retail in general.
You make an interesting point there, and Dubai, case in point. You talked about generational piece of this puzzle. And so while geographically there are trends in China and there are trends in Dubai and the UK, there's also a huge demographic component to the shift in this. Zhongming Song, I'll come to you on that. The demographics also will drive e-commerce, will drive online retail, will they not?
Yeah, absolutely, right? So especially the younger generations, they are willing to experiment, right? So the live streaming, they are the heavy users of TikTok or Bilibili, right? So if you are using those platforms, then you'll be able to reach, those groups much more effectively. But then also, we should note that the older generation, also because of COVID, they are forced to go on digital, right? So therefore, it may not be live streaming, but there could be other channels that that you can use, right, using the digital, right? But then also, another thing that I'd like to highlight is that there is also behavioral change among the young generations too, right? So Pocket talked about post 95 and post 2000, etc., right? But then some of those segments used to be called Yue Guangzhu, meaning, they just, spend everything of their monthly salary, right? So because they don't worry about their income, according to our survey, half of them say that, they don't worry about their income because their parents will help them. During the COVID, they started worrying about their job security as well for the first time in their life, and also their parents' job security too, right? So they are becoming more mature, and more prudent and cautious about their spending behavior. So if you look at the savings in China, it increased by 8%. If you look at consumer lending, it decreased by 20%. And if you look at the number of apps downloaded, the financial management apps downloaded, more than half of the people who downloaded those apps were the people under 30 years old. So clearly there is also some shift of those behavior of those young generation as well, which we should pay attention to.
Okay. Andre, last question to you. Big generational piece, I would imagine, to the shift in trends and behaviors.
Sorry, was that a question to me? Oh, yeah.
It was to Andre, but he seems to
okay.
have present. Andre, you still with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, just what your take on this whole generational piece to this puzzle.
Well, I think that a very large percentage of our users, of the young users, right, and they are quicker to adopt new technologies. And for example, live streaming, right, and live streaming, in a lot of platforms, including ourselves, has been definitely one of the hottest topics and trends in China and probably in the rest of the world. And then I think I agree with Pocket, and then it's a supplement. It's supplemental to the physical experience. And it's just think about where you were talking about Dubai. And then, in the Dubai shopping malls, I've been to the Dubai shopping malls. They're huge and they're very grand shopping malls. But still, they have these limitations, right? But if you think about the virtual world, live streaming can create so much more content without border, without boundaries. And then, people in there, the young people nowadays, when they're using live streaming, they can look at, they can do like virtual shopping tours in Paris, and then they can either learn cooking lessons from Michelin 3-star restaurant chef, right? So all these contents, and I think the younger people, they have absolutely I think they have a lot better experience, and then with the online live streaming.
Okay, next question, and Ganglu, I want to put this one to you first, and this is from Zoe Ma. How is the regulatory environment in China keeping up with new commerce trends?
Yeah, because I think our speaker just mentioned about from live streaming. So I think live streaming is popular here, but we also see some kind of the downside or the dark side of live streaming, because there's so many live streaming KOA or so-called KO that's selling stuff. Then there's actually quite a few of them, and then we realize actually the thing they are selling is maybe the overstate, the quality of the product. So I think that's why we see more like a regulatory, regulation from the government, and how we can kind of prevent that all this happens. I think in China, personally, I think the good thing in China is you see the trend, then you see the regulation come right after the trend. So basically, I think there's a lot of things to be done, and so luckily we see the big guys, the JD, Alibaba, and Pinduoduo is kind of drive the trend, and we see the regulation come after.
Thanks. Next question, interesting one, and I believe Pocket, I'll come to you because you touched on this earlier. The role in e-commerce of influencers and marketing trends. Is live streaming and brand and the potential for brands to connect directly to consumers going to change the sort of online influencers that have become so prominent over the last 5 years?
I think influencers have played a very important role. They are the ones who create high quality content. They're the ones who create this, you know, a middle agent that creates this relatability between brands and consumers. And many of these influencers have, you know, transitioned to become key opinion leaders, and they have kind of become the ambassadors for some brands and kind of unofficial spokespersons for the brands to connect them with the consumers and also reflect on the feedback back to the brand. And some influencers, you know, have jumped into live streaming and become even closer and like interacting even more frequently face to face with their followers. And this has enabled something else that's very interesting. And I call that C2M, which is consumer to manufacturing. So there have been this, you know, group of influencers who sell their own brands, or they are selling on behalf of other brands, but because they are interacting with consumers so frequently and so closely, they then have a say in the manufacturing process, either with their own brands or other brands that they're working with, to directly incorporate the feedback from consumers, to fine-tune details, to determine which models or which, you know, products or which sizes we should carry in the next batch. So there's a more significant value in what influencers can bring. And for brands, it's a tricky, you know, question. Like, do I work with influencers? How often? How much do I pay them? And because influencers have become kind of this verification for brands to earn the trust of consumers, and they are the messenger, they are the face, they are they're playing this very important role, and many influencers have gone on to start their own brands. So I think for brands, they have to figure out, what is my long-term strategy? Because very often the consumers might buy your products through a live stream session, but it's very low conversion to become long-term sustainable customers of a certain brand. Sometimes they just trust the live streamer and not really the brand. So I think brands have to be very conscious about, you know, what is the message you want to come across, and how do you win the customer over once they place this impulse purchase order during a live stream. How do you use little details to hook them over and not trick them, but to, you know, attract them to buy again.
Great. Look, we're almost out of time. I want to go to each of our panelists and ask you one final question. And I'll start with you, Gang Lu. We've seen a dramatic increase in online retail numbers during the lockdown period. Will those sorts of growth rates continue? Are we at a point now where the momentum is such that the new way of the e-commerce and the rise of new retail in China is unstoppable?
Well, of course, it's unstoppable. I think I think with or without pandemic, I think it's always unstoppable. But I think that I would say that it's a question. It's a question from me as well as, you know, is there anything, you know, what happened during pandemic? Did anything become normal right after the pandemic? I think that's the thing. I think we all mention about live streaming, because to me is a bit controversial. Is you know, after the pandemic, do we really rely on the live streaming stuff like KOL? Because certainly we see KOL, we see the value, but there's just too many right now. I think, you know, probably we're going to see, you know, is like kind of over the hype. And also another question when we talk about online experience and also offline experience is, I guess, because I think after, you know, we don't know how long the pandemic is going to be, for another 2 months or 3 months. But I think the more and more people, we are kind of desperately, we need offline experience. So which means we're going to see something, you know, back to normal, like offline activities, but it has to be offline. We need that, but also the offline plus like digitalizations. So I think that will be, I think everybody should think about that. Is you know, we know online cannot really 100% replace the offline experience.
Okay, so you see a return to not necessarily normal, but an offline experience once we're through the pandemic, but it might be slightly different. Xiaomin, I mean, it could be a year before there's a vaccine. It could be quite a while with social distancing. what are you seeing? Are you seeing some sort of return to offline retail that existed pre-pandemic, or are we now at a point where the change is locked in forever?
Yeah, so if you look at the other, so we analyzed about 500 million offline transactions as well, right? So now we are at about 87-90% of the other pre-COVID spending. So offline is coming back, right? And then also as to your question whether the online can continue to grow, right? But so the overall pace of the growth will definitely slow down because Chinese economy overall needs to slow down, right? And it doesn't need to grow at 10% anymore, right? And that's a very natural evolution. And if you look at the e-commerce, it used to grow at triple digit, right? And during the COVID, single digit, but probably still will grow faster than the overall offline. But if the overall growth of those the segments and sectors will slow down. However, the innovation will continue, right? Because there are still plenty of opportunities to innovate and solve customers' problem, lots of capital, entrepreneurship, and technology innovation. So therefore, we are likely to see continuous evolution of those O2O, live streaming, and all sorts of different combination of technologies and business models getting incubated out of China.
Okay, Andre, to you, are you seeing slower growth rates in e-commerce overall, partly driven by the slowdown in the Chinese economy, but still higher growth rates than the old economy?
Well, I think I mean, we saw the online sales of apparel drop significantly during the pandemic, but the online sales of food and groceries going up, right? So some pocket you see some slowdown, but other pockets you see like significant growth. I think overall the e-commerce is the development and digitalization of the economy is the trend, right? So I think the way I said, like the role we think that e-commerce platform should play in reshaping the future of retail business is just by aggregating consumer demand to optimize supply chain, which in turn creates real value to consumers. I think that's, if we can do that, the e-commerce is going to play a better and bigger role in the people's lives.
Right, so better and bigger role for e-commerce. Final word to you, Pocket. You're an investor. You're looking for opportunities. Do you see rapid growth, continued rapid growth in e-commerce, and where are the opportunities?
For China specifically, I am noticing a huge change in the dynamics between Chinese homegrown brands and foreign brands who are doing cross-border e-commerce in China. So previously, I think Western brands had a head start. They had, kind of the advantage of being more advanced and, have more prestige. But in the recent years, I am seeing this huge rise of Chinese homegrown brands by this new generation of entrepreneurs who might have, worked overseas and who have been educated elsewhere. And they're bringing some really interesting design thinking and the kind of East meets West kind of specialty back to China and creating this new breed of brands, and they have the potential to become iconic, and some of them are already using digital tools and data tools to overthrow the decade-long advantages accumulated by these huge conglomerates, and many of them that I know of have created $0 to $100 million kind of revenue growth in 3 years. And I think that's really, really exciting. And so I think for foreign brands who want to enter China, cross-border e-commerce is still growing. This year, the size is supposed to double what it was last year. And Tmall, for example, has created this direct route for foreign brands to come in and bypass some barriers like animal testing for beauty brands. So I think there's still opportunity, but that opportunity is slowly fading away. I think there is the appeal of the Western narrative is starting to fade, which I think is super interesting. And I want to see more brands with Chinese kind of cultural representation and this pride to create world-class brands.
Fantastic. So the rise of new brands, new Chinese brands challenging the conventional ones out of the West. Really fascinating. Look, I'm afraid we've actually overrun. So it just remains for me to thank all of our speakers, Pocket Sun, Andre Zhu, Zhemin Xiong, and Gang Lu, and of course the team from TechNode for working with Asia House to put this together. Also to thank all of you who joined, several hundred of you at one point. Really good of you to take part. Sorry I didn't get to all of your questions. We would have needed another hour or two to do that. But look, all of you, great to see you. Do stay safe. Thank you very much for your contributions. And we'll talk to you very soon, I hope. Take very good care. Goodbye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.